My guest on this episode is Pandora Paloma, who has made millions in sales and yet is someone you would quite happily sit down and have a coffee with, or a matcha in her case. I'm going to ask her about her own journey, but also to spill some of the secrets around what makes good content in 2026. So, Pandora, welcome.
Hi, good to be here. How are you?
I am good. So, you describe yourself as a business alchemist and mentor. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to have got to this place?
Yes. The Alchemist actually came from a mentor. She's a friend of mine, Nikki Clinch, and I've been training in maturation, which is mind body maturation, which is a modality. Um, and she said, "Darling, you're so much more than a mentor. You're just it's kind of like alchemy what you do." And in a way, it's sort of true. So I am a business mentor, and I suppose that alchemy really comes from the sort of depth that I bring to looking at life and looking at business. So some may call that spirituality. I would call it kind of maturation, which essentially is kind of who we are being and how we are outgrowing identities, in order to evolve so that we can hold more in our business. So a big thing that I teach is, building the capacity or creating the capacity to actually build and hold what it is that you say that you want. I come from a marketing background. I did that for many years. My first job in marketing, I think I was about 17, 18 years old, and I turned 41 this year. So I've been doing this a really long time. Um, and I bring these sort of two worlds of kind of, marketing, business with maturation. And that's really the kind of the alchemy piece so that we can outgrow who we know ourselves to be and step into who we truly are. And from there, that's really where kind of, our potential and limitlessness lies.
So you've kind of mentioned identity there, and I think a lot of people think with, marketing or business coaching that it's about the structure, it's about the method, it's about someone telling you what to do. But something you said in one of your pinned reels is that you've had to shed a lot of identities to get here. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit more about that, both in terms of the identities that you've had to shed and the fact that it's okay to go through multiple ones and just let them go.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm in like in maturation, we call it stage three. Think of like Dark Night of the Soul kind of vibes. I'm in it right now, where everything I have built, I'm looking at it and going, wow, I don't need that anymore. To give you context, I've kind of built a business around the experience that I had with my mother, which is if I hold your stuff, you'll love me. And so I'm looking at my business and going, I don't want to hold that. I don't want to hold that for that person or this person. And it's not because I don't love my work, it's the way that I'm creating from. And when you no longer need that way of being, everything shifts. My work will be exactly the same, but it's how I'm doing it will shift, right? And that's kind of one of the identities that I'm currently shifting of like, actually, I don't need to be so in that, and I don't want to carry that, and I don't want to work in that way anymore. I've had many ego deaths, and I think we can all, anyone who is ambitious will have dreams and goals and vision, right? And I think a lot of my identity deaths have been really being having to get very, very honest about whether or not that is even what I want, why I think I want that, what is it that I really want. Um, and, and I think another massive thing has been this sort of softness. I have softened again and again and again and again. I had a very hard exterior, very hyper independent. And sometimes life has just really helped me pop that, and I've had to get very vulnerable and, and I'm very honest with myself. And then I think there's kind of more kind of practical identities that we outgrow, which is, am I going to, be able to hold that conversation? I'm so able now to have very honest conversations with my clients. It comes with, the ability that I have to coach them because I really have to tell them the truth, as hard as sometimes that is to say and as hard as it is for them to receive it. But when they get out of the other side of that, it's like, oh my God, I am so glad that you held me in that because, I really needed to see that. When a client wants to break a contract, which happens so rarely in my world, but when it does, I really have to hold. You signed a contract. There is a contract for a reason. And so there's this really, really beautiful kind of more practical part of the identity growth, which is comes with what I'm talking about in terms of capacity, which is I really have to hold myself differently. And sometimes I have to hold people differently too. I'm really holding you in your highest, and you're either going to really vibe with me on this or you're not. And it really depends on what you're ready to be responsible for, So there's that kind of responsibility piece I talk about a lot as well, because as we outgrow identities and step into new identities, and the more that we're holding in our business, we really need to, yeah, have a certain level of capacity, to hold that. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers your question. Very long-winded, but it's so hard sometimes to think about, who I was and who I am now. I used to rush all the time. That was a big part of my identity. There must always be rushing. There's always something to do, and I'm not that way anymore. But I've kind of forgotten, like, oh my God, yeah, do you remember that? Do you remember that whole, like, 20-year period where you just rushed all the time? I don't know myself as that anymore.
I think for a lot of people, once they establish themselves in business, they feel they have to stick to that because
Mm.
there's some sort of shame in not being consistent. Is there anything advice that you would have for anybody who's feeling the urge to change but feeling like they also shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you have the urge to change, then that that is the only thing that you need. If you're feeling anything, if something isn't in flow, there's a reason for that. So a client came to me, we had a session last week, and there's a tug of war happening internally and externally in her business. And what we got to was that, her whole way of being was that she needed to be rescued. And so for her, she was like, oh my God, this is how I'm showing up in my business, that I need to be rescued. And I was like, that's it. This is this energy that I could feel. She signed a client, paid him full, one-to-one client that afternoon. Can you see that sometimes it's like we have to look at what is blocked in us? And that's very courageous. And if we can start to do that, and then we start allowing the concept that we are everything, nothing, and nothing is really happening come in, that's really, I think, where our kind of power and an opportunity lies, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of this is kind of tied to the nervous system, isn't it? Which is, I know you mentioned capacity and having the capacity to hold things, which again, a lot of it is your nervous system. The nervous system obviously holds all of the stuff from the early years, and that's where a lot of the healing has to take place. But we know this, but like having a conversation about nervous system in a business context for a lot of people is going to be, but that's therapy or that's somatic healing. Like,
Mm.
so it's really interesting that I find that this is all coming in here now, and finally people are making the connection. You can't ignore this. You can't exist. You exist with it the entire time. You never leave it behind.
The business, my thing is that the business cannot outgrow the human being running it. So you can keep moving towards that 100 grand year or $1 million year, but it will not outgrow you because you are creating it. You have to be responsible for holding it. That's why we see so many people, they scale their businesses, things happen, and then somehow it has to be, burnt to the ground. It's because survival is very, very strong. Survival does not want you to thrive. And so often the actual reality of having the very thing is such a threat to the survival that the survival will do anything that it can to sabotage it, And so it's, yeah, as I say, it's a process. It's a long process. That's why, with my one-to-one clients, I work with them for a minimum of a year. It has to be a year because, you know, I'm a miracle worker, but, it takes time. And so I think that there is, and I can hand on heart say for myself, I was in a cycle of like, oh my God, money, oh my God, there's no money, oh my God, money, oh my God, there's no money. And even just that is, wow, like, could my nervous system actually hold having the very thing that I said that I wanted? No, it could not. So I have to get really comfortable with that. And yeah, the nervous system piece will show up in different ways. I'm actually speaking to someone about that for my own podcast because, because I teach a lot of the very practical things, Facebook ads, funnels, sales funnels, there's quite a few moving parts to that. And it takes a bit of us to master that. And sometimes my clients will say, like, oh, this feels a bit dysregulating. And I'm like, well, it is going to feel dysregulating. Learning anything new is going to feel a little bit dysregulating. But this is about how we start to expand our capacity. It's like that one hard conversation that we have to have. And then it's like, oh, okay, that actually was okay. And then by the time we have to have a very similar conversation, we feel pretty good about it. And then, suddenly it's like having that conversation is just a no, it's just a nothing to the nervous system because we've built the capacity for it.
Yeah. It is okay to be dysregulated, isn't it, as well? I think people are missing this. You can be dysregulated. We're not meant to be regulated the whole time, but it's when you get stuck, I think
Yeah.
it's really problematic.
Exactly. So me and my partner went to the gym this morning, and it's a new gym, and we did this class called Blaze. It sounds as scary as it actually is. It's a bit like Barry's boot camp in London, and so it's pretty hardcore. And the first time that we went, Sam was like, "I can't do this. It's just too much for me." And so I left the class, and there was only one extra round. But I think in their head they were like, "Oh my God, there's so many rounds of this, and like I'm already feeling like I'm gonna die." And we got up this morning and I was like, come with me to Blaze. I was like, you're not going to increase your capacity for this cardiovascular exercise unless you get in the room. Same concept. What happened? They walked out of the class today and they were like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did that. Can you see? It's like if you go, oh no, that's too scary and I'm never going to do it, then you're never ever going to expand your capacity to be able to do it in the future. And so it's exactly one of the same concept. This is a little bit difficult. I'm going to feel a bit dysregulated. Okay, then I'm going to go back to my tools and I'm going to regulate myself outside of this. And then I'm going to come back to it. And then suddenly it feels like a nothing. And it's so easy because you've expanded it. We become masters of things that we choose to become masters of. And most people who aren't quite where they want to be in business, it's about kind of that tolerance and expanding that sort of tolerance level. Um, yeah.
So horrible when you're doing it, though.
Yeah, it is. But I say all the time, I don't look for regulation in my business. Business by nature is very dysregulating. I can have two clients and I build a very similar launch plan for them and with them, and one thrives, 50 grand launch, absolutely thrilled. Another client just keeps coming up and bumping against problem after problem, doesn't see the same result. That's a human being problem, not their problem as a human being, but that is where that being part comes in. And so, it's yeah, it's part of everything is so nuanced. It's like it really is about the capacity that you have and a tolerance you have to certain things. Does it mean that this person over here who didn't see the result the first time won't ever see that result? No, it just means that there's maybe some things that they need to expand into and build and grow and evolve into in order to do it, next time round. So I think, we also forget that like what we're doing outside of our business is really important. I don't look for security to a point in my business. I've have systems and a way of working that, makes it pretty repeatable and predictable. But, look at the season that we're in right now. It's like things that used to work suddenly aren't working. Okay, we're going to have to try something new. And so, my regulation is over here outside of my business, in my relationships, in how often I'm in the sauna at the gym, in how often I'm doing breath work and meditating. And that's where my regulation, is experienced and is built so that by the time I get to being in my business at 11 a.m. on a Monday morning, it's like, cool, okay, I've got this. And I think people look for security in their business perhaps more than they should. The security and the regulation comes over here, And then your business, it means that you have the capacity to do what you need to do in your business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned like we're in a season of things just not working that used to work.
I think things are working. I just think it's different.
It's changed enormously since, especially since I started, obviously, because I'm very old. But so, what are the key differences at the moment? Do you think what's really shifting?
So I think the key thing that we're seeing is show up rates and conversion rates are much lower. So even kind of like 3 years ago, you maybe would do a free masterclass and you'd have maybe 40, 50% of people would be live. Now we're looking at anything from 5 to 15%. I think if you get 20% of people live, then anything above 20% is considered good these days. So what that means is that we need a bigger pool of people every time. So let's say you had 100 people signed up and 50 people were live. Well, now that might only be 15. So you need maybe 300 people to sign up to get those 45. Do you see what I mean? Suddenly it's like it becomes more. I've always considered it a numbers game and we just play the game. But that's been a change. I think people are being more discerning over who they're investing in and what they're investing in. And also, I think we used to be able to get away with pretty average content. Now we're having to, just dial in a little bit harder with our content. And what I mean by that is kind of, really speaking specifically to, who it is that you serve in a slightly different way. I think having a point of view is really important now. AI has changed the game so much. There's so much information. Oh my gosh. Do we need any more information? No. But I think what we're really interested in is people's point of view, which is another thing. Can you see how that also requires more of us as an individual, as a business? Because for the person who's like, the comfort was to hide behind a carousel. Well, actually, now maybe they might need to get on board with doing videos and speaking to camera and really having and sharing their point of view, which for their survival is a really big threat. It's not safe for me to be visible. It's not safe for me to use my voice. So I think it's requiring a lot of us on many levels. But that said, I think there is still movement. I think the people who are very devoted to their service and very devoted, to humanity will be fine. Um, but it's just different.
I think yeah, the AI point is a really valid one actually because it's meant that your knowledge is not necessarily as valuable as it used to be able to tell people things
Yeah,
because they can just go and ask ChatGPT or whatever.
totally. It's interesting. I caught up with a friend. She moved to LA quite some years ago, and set up a PR agency. It's how we knew each other. She was actually my intern back in the day when I worked in PR. And she said, she'd had a few turbulent years where the rise of the influencer and everything was about influencers. And so suddenly they had to build that into, their strategies. But she said, like PR is rock and rolling, journalism is out. Like, but PR is back in because even now people are searching, instead of searching on Google, they're searching AI. Who is a good business coach in the UK? So if you've got press in certain publications, AI, that's how AI is going to gather that information. And so a lot of service-based brands now, a lot of personal brands, they want PR because they know that it's going to support them to be found through, AI search terms. It's super fascinating, the just the way that the world works and what comes around sometimes, leaves and then it comes back round and yeah,
90s fashion.
kind of is, right? And in a way, as I said, I've been in marketing such a long time. The things that work have always worked, you know, and that is really knowing who you're speaking to, doubling down on, um, the different types of messaging at different stages of the funnel. I think the big thing that people really get wrong is like in their content, they're trying to give everyone the breadth of all of their work. It's like, no, 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 no. Top of funnel content, just you're showing people your boobs, It's like they get the rest, they get the full frontal behind the scenes, and that's kind of, one of our content strategists, she's always like, you're always just showing people your boobs, and that's what top of funnel content is. It's like it should be top line, here's what I'm known for, in a way, kind of dumbing yourself down because it's very accessible and people can really then start to understand on a very simple level what you do. How you then do that is what you teach them and show them behind the scenes. Um, and then having something that shows people what you do behind the scenes, whether that is a training or a VSL or a something, social proof, always obvious, has always been the thing that builds trust. Like, oh, I can see that you have helped other people, and here's how you did that. It's only going to make people want to invest in you because they trust that you can do the thing that you are promising you can do. Um, and yeah, in many ways, it's all of these things that they've always worked, and it's just how we're delivering them now that's maybe changing.
So the connection element maybe has always been there, but
Yeah, that's it.
everyone's doing yapping videos right now, right? Which is fine if you don't have a perimenopausal brain that can't string a sentence together. Although I quite enjoy them. But there is a huge element of vulnerability, which you touched upon,
Mm.
in terms of A, sharing your opinions, especially if they're on the controversial side, and B, just showing your face or showing your home or showing your body. So obviously this podcast is about vulnerability and how leaning into it is a good thing, even though it can be extremely uncomfortable. How much of that is necessary now, do you think, in order to get your content seen and trusted?
I mean, look, there are definitely human beings whose content is not that, who are doing really, really well. Again, it comes back to, if you're zooming out, what's the ecosystem? Like if you were churning out loads and loads and loads of content that wasn't yapping content, but you were willing to do, I don't know, 10 trial wheels a day, post 2 or 3 times on Instagram, could you see growth? 100%. Do you have the capacity to do that? Well, it's questionable, right? I think that overall, what I'm seeing is that that connection piece is really, it's not actually about the yapping videos. It's about the fact that that video helps you feel connected to someone. And so we also have to remember that, you know, the algorithm favors trends, right? There'll be another trend. Give it 6 months, there'll be something else that's performing better. And also, when everyone else is going left, doing yapping videos, sometimes it's the people that are going right that end up standing out. It will have its time, essentially, is what I'm saying. Um, but the essence of it is that it is a point of view. It's having something to say about the thing that you do, that you're passionate about, um, in order to attract the people that you want to work with, nurture the people that you want to work with, and ultimately convert the people that you want. That's really what content is. We attract, we nurture. I call it authority. So it's, attract content, authority content, which is you talking about your authority, sharing your authority, giving your point of view, and then demand. Demand is kind of really where the conversion lies. So, yes, I think it's important, but content's always been important. How you deliver that content, completely up to you. Again, you could go all in on a podcast, and be like, that is where people find me, that's where I sell, that's it, because that's, what feels the right space for you. Some people are using Substack, some people are using, Instagram. Again, it's kind of really looking at what feels true and right for me.
Resilience isn't about avoiding stress, it's about meeting it with strength. This adaptogenic trio is called our chill mix for a reason. Our award-winning calm and collected formula is a favourite among people with busy, anxious brains. I have combined lion's mane, ashwagandha and holy basil with sea greens to ease your racing mind and calm a jittery body. Consistency is key when it comes to adaptogens, so make calm and collected part of your evening ritual for calm, resilience and rest.
So can you talk a bit more about authority?
Yeah, so for some people, I help them to extract almost like their method. You know, there's a million different ways. People buy into, um, oh, I can't remember her name, but she said there's no unique messages, but there are unique messengers. And that's really it. There's a lot of people who do a very similar thing to me. but it's how I deliver it, it's how I speak to it. Saying that, I actually don't know anyone who weaves the strategic lens that I have with maturation, but I might be wrong. If anyone's listening and that's you, let me know because I'd like to speak. But you have a uniqueness. All of my clients have a uniqueness, and it's really about kind of, weaving that uniqueness out and then going, what's your point of view on this? What is your method? Why is it that your clients are getting results? We could, even 2 years ago, get away with just showcasing results. Now, consumers, and our audience, they want to know how that happened, so more kind of breaking down how client got from A to B. I think it helps people see that it's possible for them, when they know the kind of the context and the pieces. Um, and then I think there's kind of, what we get to share about our industries. I'm not one to talk badly about the coaching industry. I think it's an incredible industry, but I will speak about, the people that I see thriving right now are doing these things. The reason why I think the industry has changed, the ways in which I think that we can go against the grain, and it's an authority that you have. It shows, I think mostly it shows that you care. It shows that you're on the pulse. It shows that are qualified and an authority in that space, you know? Yeah.
That's really interesting. So how do you balance authority and vulnerability? Because I think a lot of us have this kind of traditional perception of authority, which is really more patriarchal.
Yeah.
Authority is an impenetrable person in a suit, which doesn't really work for a lot of us. But that still leaves you with a thing in the back of your head that like vulnerability is bad, vulnerability will undermine. So how do you kind of
Yeah, being an authority doesn't mean I am more powerful. What I have to say is more important. Actually, it's about being honest. And so that's where that vulnerability piece can come through. And I think that it's making sure that you have the hybrid of attract content, of authority content, of demand content, so that overall you aren't being too much of one, right? If you're selling all the time, people will switch off. They don't want to know. If you're only ever going, this is the way, and here's my authority, and here's my point of view, can feel a little bit like heavy. When you breathe, if you're only using attract content, which is that light-hearted, meant to be funny, meant to be hooky and capture people, people won't see you as an authority. Can you see that it's the mix of the three that builds the ecosystem? And I think that vulnerability is actually really important to share when it's not performative. There was definitely a little season, it became a bit of a trend where people would like showcase their vulnerability. And I always like to say, speak, when you've got the scar, not when it's, the wound. So it's using your experience. Like, for example, for context, I probably will create something around, I'm 40 years old, I've built this business, something's not been feeling right recently, and here's how I'm changing it. I'm disrupting my whole business. It's very honest. It doesn't take away from my authority, but it is kind of like, hey, these sort of void seasons are quite normal. Here's how I'm, moving through it. And it's about creating conversation where people can resonate with what you're saying. I think we've gone past the everything's just perfect, shiny disco ball, nothing in my life is wrong or bad, and everything's really successful. We know that that's not true. And so where people can really speak to, here's how I personally got through this season, that is your authority, but it's also you being vulnerable, you know? Yeah.
yeah. I'm so glad we're not in that perfection season anymore. It was so draining.
Yeah,
All
that's it.
multiple crying videos as well.
Yeah, that's it. And this is what I mean. It's you stand, or what's that term? You last a lifetime when you dabble with the trends, but you also know that it's just a trend. Do you know what I mean? It's,
The
yeah.
difference between style and fashion, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think that there's so many other ways that we can just this is in a sense why I think the yapping videos have become such a trend because it's like it's just so lovely to for someone to be like just just chatting about something that they yeah that might be relevant for someone else. Saying that they all there's still a formula to a good yapping video. Your hook is that 3 second mark that you have to capture someone's attention. But what you're saying in the next, 1 to 10 seconds is equally important, So, for example, I see a lot. I just wanted to come on here and tell you about, like, you've lost me. Whereas if you're like, can we talk about X? I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And even like, Korean skincare, for example. I did like a really silly reel the other day. So I'm obsessed with Korean skincare. Like the amount of people in my DMs, like, oh my God, what are you using? It's nothing to do with business, but it's something to do with a human connection, And I think that's what our content should be doing. It shows us who we are as a human being, what our values are, what we care about, and how we can support our communities to see a result that we know that we can, support them with.
Definitely. And how do you balance that with selling?
I sell mostly off app. So I will have a call to action for something that's performing really well for us at the moment is our VSL funnel. So it's like a short video on we teach a gateway offer method. So think of like 1 2 1 1. One offer, two order bumps, one upsell, leading to one high ticket. That's performing really, really well for us. We're not paying for our leads, we're actually getting profit on the front end, and then we sell on the back end. So I might have a call to action of like, let's say the content was like results. I might say, if you want to see me talk about the entire breakdown of how this gateway offer funnel works, comment gateway and you'll be sent to the video. So we're very much kind of on the front end, teaching method, teaching how, teaching result, giving results, and then we're selling on the back end. Unless we're in perhaps a specific launch and we have, an incentive for that month, then I would do, a little bit more launch content or selling content. But mostly we're finding that actually we're sort of selling off app, which is, what I teach, kind of getting people off the app and into a funnel so that you're able to showcase the breadth of your work. This is another thing. You cannot possibly showcase the breadth of your work in a 90-second reel or a 6 second B-roll or like a 10-page carousel. Do you see what I mean? And it's very much front end, top of funnel, and then you really showcase the rest of it off the app.
Do you get a lot of people coming to you who are struggling with kind of the ick?
Yeah, yeah. And it's often confusion, It's like, actually, I don't really know what I'm saying. So every time I am trying to say something, I feel a bit icky. And then we're like, okay, let's just break it down. And most of the time, I always say to people, you have been brought to this work for a reason. And the more that you can trust that this is why you are here and this is what you're here to deliver, the ick will dissolve. The ick is you feeling uncomfortable with something. So let's get to that. Let's get to the root of that first, you know. And it is a different world. It's of course it's a different world. I remember when stories came out and I was like, oh my God, what I've got to speak to camera. And I recorded probably 20 times. And in the end, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. And so I just went, I'm just gonna press send and I'm just going to leave my phone up here and I'm going to go make a cup of tea and that's what I'm going to do. And you know what? No one died. It was fine. And then this is what we were talking about capacity. Suddenly I did it again and then I did it. And now I mean, I don't have a problem with it at all, you know?
I feel like we're also coming back full circle to identity a little bit as well.
Mm.
Is there an identity that you've seen either in yourself or in your clients that is really problematic? So, something along the lines of like the good girl or, I mean, not everyone's got the same, obviously, because we're all different, but is there anything which really holds people back in particular?
Yeah, I wrote something about this the other day online, which was, there's a reason why I don't care what my friends think, because the friends that matter, I already know what they think. I have a whole bunch of people who I would consider a community. I wouldn't necessarily consider them friends. They watch my stuff. I don't think they're ever like, oh my God, babe, this is amazing, so proud of you. So I don't need to worry what they think. Because if they're watching and they're not saying anything, then they're not a friend. And that's one of the big things that I see limits people. That there was like maybe someone, from year 11 who still follows you, and you don't want to just be seen to be showing off. Like, okay, just pretend that everyone's watching and no one's watching. That's the people um who deserve your time and attention, they'll be the ones that are, really kind of hyping you up and being a cheerleader. And anyone else, it's like you're just doing you. I think that it's a big thing, to really be okay with perhaps being misunderstood. That's a personal kind of big thing for me, that I've always been different. I was different to my family, I was different to my stepsisters, I was different to my brother and sister. Um, I've always felt a little bit misunderstood, and I've just had to really be okay with that, you know? So, yeah, people pleasing, worried about what people think, um, knowing that perhaps you're different, but you are different. If you're an entrepreneur, you are different. Like, sorry to burst that bubble, but you are. There's a reason why 2% of female-run companies hit the seven-figure mark, because it's really fucking tough. And like, there's a certain quality and a certain personality and characteristics that you have, to get to somewhere like that. And I don't know what the percentage is now of six-figure businesses, but it's really not as high as it should be. And so yeah, can you be really comfortable that like I am different?
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. You said also about not being, just allowing yourself to be misunderstood is so powerful.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the big head, kind of like not this, what was it you said? Not being arrogant, not being too confident.
Yeah.
Especially for women, I think this idea of not wanting to be a big head, like
Yeah.
I think it's a wall that a lot of us collide with, especially when it comes to selling.
Yes. I have had a really big, I'm a double Leo, so like my head could get really big, my ego could be massive. Um, when I work with anyone, I'm like, the key thing for me is that I stay humble. Like my wife, like keeps me so humble. And that's always been a priority for me, because I also, not so much now, but back then, old me, I was like, I could have been a bit of a dickhead. I worked in fashion, I was quite known in that industry. I really could have gone either way. I could have continued in that world and I probably wouldn't have been a very nice person. But I always had this. I used to read Vogue magazine and Zest magazine, if anyone remembers. Zest magazine. Um, and I kind of just really harnessed and allowed myself to go that way, which of course became my spiritual practice and many different awakenings. And yeah, I could have really gone one way or the other. And at every level of success that I've actually got, what's super interesting is the more humble that I've become. The more money I've made, the less I need, and it used to be about this and this, and I've got this. Now I've probably got, more than ever, and I really don't want for much. My life's got very, very simple. Um, so yeah, it's kind of knowing that's it. For me, it's a choice, it's really a choice of what are you doing it for as well. I'm not doing this because I want more power. I'm doing it because I am powerful and I want to meet a potential within myself and show other people that it's possible. But really, I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it because I get to play this game of life, and why not? But I also always come back to like, it really means nothing. My work is important, but it really means nothing. It's only what we make it mean that makes it important. Do you see what I mean?
Stories you tell yourself.
Yeah. So if you think my work's important and I think my work's important, we'll have a great working relationship. But the moment that I don't see it as important or you don't see it as important, we won't get the same result. And so, yeah, yeah, and you know, I've worked and been around kind of lots of 7, 8 figure entrepreneurs, and they're some of the nicest, kindest people I've ever met. And that's, you know, how many of us have a story about, you know, well, if you're like that, you must be like that, or I've found such the opposite, and I live my life as if I will always, always, always get the best in someone. And you know what I often do, and sometimes I get really surprised, you know, by people because my survival will want to make someone wrong, or oh, you know, you are that person. And actually, when you can just meet people where they're at, but really choose to see the best in them, you'll often be really surprised.
Yeah, that's having trust in people is, or having trust that people can be good, I think, and
Having
people,
trust that people can be good.
yeah.
Yeah. And you know, anyone who's projecting on their stuff on you, it's like no one knows me. I don't even know. I'm still learning about myself. So if anyone's got an opinion, it's like, cool, let's talk that out, you know? And the amount of times I've worked with people, and I've had it myself, I've just become friends with someone whose work I came across years ago. And I think I paid for this course. It was recommended by a friend, and I think I did 2 of the classes, and I was like, I cannot. This woman is scary, too powerful, too talking about masculine and feminine. I was not ready for it. I was not ready to be with my feminine power because I was all in the masculine. And then I recently realized that she lived in the in the town next door to me, and we met for a coffee. And now it's like we chat on a level, and it's so beautiful. It signifies my own growth because I just couldn't. I just couldn't. And now I'm like, oh my God, now we just, you know, we riff and we're great friends. It goes to show that was my own growth. Had I been like, she's this and she's this, and no, it's like, yeah, just not ready. And I've had people say that to me, like, you really triggered me. I'm like, okay, good. And now I'm ready to work with you. Okay, good. You know, it's not
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question I always ask people on the podcast is what is your one note on vulnerability? So what's the one thing you'd like people to take away from this conversation?
Hmm. I think vulnerability and the essence of vulnerability is really about honesty. How honest can you get with yourself about who you are, who you want to be, where you might be limited, where you're actually brilliant and you're just not accessing enough of it, um, and kind of really what you want, you know? It really, you know, the big transitions in my life that have been the most vulnerable have been when I've been the most honest with myself.
Love that. Thank you. Well, that's been a really interesting chat. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.